7 days after my husband disappeared, I returned to the old house he had left behind, each step on the creaking floorboards echoing like a warning. I didn't know that moment would change everything. The air was colder than memory, pressing against my skin, heavy with emptiness. Dust motes floated in the faint shafts of sunlight slipping through the grimy windows, moving slowly, lazily, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. If this story grips you, a like or even a super thanks helps me keep bringing more life stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. And on screen, you'll see 2 other stories I highly recommend. There's so much more waiting for you. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, one tucked into the corner of the kitchen where shadows lingered. My fingers brushed against old bills and faded photographs before they froze on something unfamiliar. An envelope slipped from the back as if it had been waiting, and when I unfolded it, my chest tightened. Inside lay a ticket to London, crisp, real, undeniable. A life had already been planned without me, beyond me. Betrayal struck hard and silent, the kind that leaves no room for tears at first, only shock and disbelief. I sank into the chair by the counter, gripping the envelope, and noticed the teacup sitting nearby. It trembled ever so slightly and touched, a delicate reflection of the tremor in my hands. The faint smell of cold tea lingered in the air, a ghost of mornings once warm, now hollowed out by absence. Every memory of shared breakfasts, of whispered mornings, felt like a lie stacked upon another lie. I realized slowly the magnitude of what had been hidden from me all along. No shouting, no confrontation, no desperate phone calls, only this ticket, this small piece of paper that carried the weight of years I thought we shared. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, indifferent, measuring time while my world shifted. Beneath me, some truths I thought hit harder than absence. And as I sat there, envelope in lap, teacup trembling, and the cold air brushing my face, I understood one thing. This was only the beginning. Do you understand why? Let me take you back. 7 days after that ticket had shattered my fragile sense of reality, the house felt emptier than ever. Every room I entered seemed to recoil at my presence, as if the furniture itself remembered the life I once shared and now leaned away in silent judgment. The walls, once warm with our laughter, felt colder, shadowed, indifferent. I didn't know that even familiar corners could feel so foreign. I ran my fingers along the edges of tables and shelves, tracing grooves worn smooth by years of daily use. Each surface carried the ghosts of mornings we had shared, coffee cups, newspapers, the faint indentation of where he had rested his hand beside mine. Now, those marks were just reminders that he no longer existed in this life, that the person who had filled my world with small comforts had quietly disappeared without explanation. Dust floated in lazy spirals through the dim light, catching in the cracks of the floorboards like tiny suspended memories. I watched them drift, hypnotized, as though the air itself had slowed to mourn the absence I could not yet voice. A gentle breeze slipped through the open window, rustling the curtains, a subtle reminder that the world moved on, indifferent to the quiet devastation within these walls. I sank onto the faded armchair by the fireplace, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My heart ached not with anger, not yet, but with the steady, undeniable weight of abandonment. The silence pressed against me, not cruelly, but truthfully, whispering what I had tried to deny. I had been left, quietly, methodically, to discover the void he had created. Absence, I realized, reveals the weight of what was real. And in that moment, alone with dust and shadows and memories too heavy to lift, I understood that reclaiming myself would begin not with confrontation, but with seeing clearly what had been taken from me. I returned to that same drawer the next morning, as if drawn back by some unrelenting force. The envelope with the London ticket had been only the beginning. My hands, still trembling from the day before, sifted through the clutter of bills, old receipts, and forgotten letters. And then I saw them, photographs of a woman I had never met, notes folded neatly with his handwriting, envelopes addressed to him in careful script. For a moment, I froze. The air in the room seemed heavier, pressing down on my shoulders. I didn't move the papers at first, afraid that doing so would confirm what my heart already suspected. And yet, slowly, I began to lift them, one by one, letting the truth unfold. Quietly, cruelly, like a slow-burning fire consuming everything familiar. His life outside of me, his joys, his plans, his secrets lay bare before my eyes. The photographs slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor like fallen confessions. Each one told a story I was never meant to see. Dinners in candlelight, a touch on the shoulder, a smile meant only for her. I traced the edges of the pictures with my fingers, not wanting to acknowledge that the man I had loved could exist so fully without me, could create happiness so quietly behind my back. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Shadows from the morning sun stretched across the floor, mingling with the dust particles dancing lazily in the air. I sank to the floor beside the scattered letters, letting the papers rest on my knees. No screaming, no confrontation, just the quiet, devastating clarity that his betrayal was not a single moment but a carefully constructed life that had excluded me entirely. Secrets, I realized with a hollow ache, have a way of screaming the truth louder than any shout, more piercing than any accusation. And as I sat there among the letters and photographs, I understood that my path forward would demand more than grief. It would require the careful, patient strength to reclaim the life I had been denied. I sank into the worn velvet armchair in the living room, the one that had once been a quiet refuge. Now, it felt alien beneath me. The house had grown heavy with absence, each corner echoing with the hollow sound of memories I could no longer claim. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, louder than my own heartbeat, each swing of the pendulum marking time in a space that seemed suspended between past and present. Silence pressed in from all sides, dense and suffocating. It was not the kind of silence that comforts. It was accusatory, almost tactile, reminding me that no one would intervene, that no one would explain it away. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind through the broken window felt magnified, as if the house itself were complicit in his absence, a witness to a betrayal I had uncovered too late. The dim lamp in the corner flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. They stretched and twisted with the rhythm of my racing thoughts, exaggerating the emptiness, making the familiar rooms feel strange and hostile. I watched the shadows move and felt the weight of helplessness settle deeper in my chest. This was my home, yet it no longer belonged to me in the way I had imagined. I placed my hands in my lap, still steadying myself. There were no tears yet, only the tight knot of realization that the life I had lived with him was already gone, quietly erased without confrontation or confession. The house seemed to breathe around me, heavy and knowing, every sound amplified. In the oppressive quiet, I understood then, more clearly than ever, that silence can be as painful as betrayal. And in that stillness, I promised myself something small, but vital. I would not crumble. Not here. Not now. I would survive this quiet, endure it, and find a way to reclaim the life that had been quietly stolen. The morning light filtered through the grimy kitchen window, spilling across the counter where a single teacup trembled ever so slightly. I noticed it immediately, though I knew the cup itself was perfectly still. It mirrored the subtle quiver of my own hands, a fragile reflection of the tension I carried in my chest. The quiet house held its breath, and for a moment, the teacup felt like the only companion in a world that had shifted beneath me. Every object around me seemed to carry the weight of absence. The chipped plate from last week's breakfast, the cracked salt shaker, the faint imprint of his coffee mug on the counter, all reminders of what had been and what he had never cared to preserve. It was a small domestic tableau, yet every tiny imperfection cut sharper than any confrontation could have. The broken normalcy of our shared life now lay scattered before me. In the silence, in the tremble of a cup, I ran my fingers lightly over the counter, tracing the faint stains and scratches that had once seemed insignificant. Each mark whispered memories I had long taken for granted. Mornings when he had hummed while pouring tea. Evenings when our hands had brushed as we reached for the same spoon. Now, these gestures were ghosts, echoes of a man who had quietly removed himself from my world without so much as a glance back. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sunlight warm my face and the quiet settle into me. There were no tears, no dramatic sobs, only the steady acknowledgement that life, once comfortable and shared, had been disrupted. Even small things, the tremor of a teacup, a faded stain, could carry the weight of loss, of betrayal, of love that had been quietly erased. The teacup wobbled slightly as if it too understood, and in that trembling, I felt the first stirrings of resolve. The small, quiet realization that even in a world upended, I would survive, and eventually reclaim the normalcy that had been stolen from me. I unfolded the letters slowly, one by one, as though the careful motion could somehow soften their impact. Each envelope revealed fragments of a life I had never been part of, dinners by candlelight in restaurants I had never heard of, secret weekend trips to towns I had never visited, quiet moments of laughter and joy that had belonged entirely to him and someone else. My chest tightened with a slow, suffocating pressure, yet I did not yell. I did not throw the letters across the room. I only sat still, letting the cruel symmetry of my exclusion sink in. The house around me seemed to lean closer, pressing the silence into my skin. Dust danced in the sunlight streaming through the half-open window, and the curtains swayed gently in the breeze, whispering forgotten stories into the empty room. Each movement of fabric, each faint rustle, felt like the soft echo of his other life brushing against mine, reminding me that I had been invisible in the most intimate corners of his world. I traced the edges of the letters, the ink almost glowing, with the deliberate care he had taken to keep this life hidden. He had chosen to divide himself, my reality on one side, his secret joy on the other, and I had only discovered the truth by chance. The enormity of it pressed against me with quiet cruelty. Every memory we had shared now carried a new bitter weight, reframed by the knowledge that my presence had never been essential to the happiness he had cultivated elsewhere. I took a deep, steadying breath, closing my eyes for a moment to let the ache settle. There was no confrontation, no dramatic unraveling, just a quiet, unbearable clarity that the worst betrayals are invisible until revealed, and that revelation can cut deeper than any shouted accusation. The curtains moved again, brushing lightly against the floor, and I understood, finally, that I would have to find a way to live with this truth. Not with anger, not with tears, but with the patient, unshakable resolve that would carry me forward beyond the life he had secretly constructed without me. I opened the suitcase and laid it on the bed, its worn corners catching the early morning light. Dust motes floated lazily through the sunlight, and I watched them drift, almost hypnotically, as I reached for the first item. An old photograph slipped from the album in my hands, a picture of us smiling, a memory frozen in happier times. I traced the edges gently, my fingers lingering over his face, over the moments I had cherished, now tinged with a bitter sense of absence. Clothes followed, each fold deliberate, each touch a quiet acknowledgement that I was letting go. The sweater he had always teased me about, the scarf I had forgotten in last winter's drawer, the little keepsakes tucked away in corners, all of it carried fragments of a life I had once believed belonged to me. I did not pause to cry. I did not hesitate. I packed slowly, methodically, each movement a silent farewell to a world that had already shifted beyond my reach. The sunlight caught the dust along the suitcase's edges, highlighting the small imperfections, the tiny scars that mirrored the subtle fractures in my own life. The room was quiet, save for the faint creak of the floorboards and the soft rustle of fabric being folded. Each sound felt amplified in the emptiness, a reminder that I was alone in this act of reclamation, that no one would witness this small ceremony of acceptance and preparation. I paused once, looking around the room, breathing in the faint scent of old wood and memories. The house held its silence, heavy and observant, as if waiting to see whether I would falter. I did not. Each item I packed was a small victory, a quiet step toward the life I would create beyond these walls, a life not defined by his absence, but by the strength I was beginning to reclaim. Letting go begins quietly, I reminded myself, and in the soft light, with a half-packed suitcase at my side, I understood that this small act of preparation was the first step toward freedom. I found it tucked behind a stack of unopened envelopes, the one I had unconsciously avoided before a letter addressed to him, with handwriting I did not recognize, curling neatly across the page. My fingers lingered on the envelope, hesitant, knowing that the moment I unfolded it would irrevocably change how I saw him, how I saw myself. The paper trembled slightly beneath my fingertips as I broke the seal, and I read the words slowly, savoring the quiet agony they delivered. The letter spoke of dinners I would never attend, of quiet weekends in towns I would never see, of whispered plans and secret joys. It was as if someone had taken my life and meticulously crafted a parallel existence that had nothing to do with me. I read it once, committing every detail to memory, and then, with deliberate care, I folded it back and returned it to its hiding place. No screams escaped my throat, no tears blurred my vision, only stillness, the deep, suffocating calm that follows the undeniable confirmation of betrayal. The weight of his secret life settled over me, and I let it press down, allowing its truth to become part of me, something I would carry forward with quiet resolve. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer, and the sunlight through the curtains seemed dimmer somehow. I could feel the air shift, the subtle currents of wind nudging the envelope gently, reminding me that the world had not stopped moving, even as mine had been fractured. Words, I realized, could be sharper than any action, more cutting than any confrontation. I set the letter aside, breathing slowly, letting the silence envelop me. This was the moment when shock turned to certainty, when suspicion crystallized into undeniable truth. And in that quiet recognition, I understood that my next steps would have to be measured, deliberate, and entirely my own. The suitcase felt heavier than it should have as I gripped the handle, each finger wrapped around the worn leather with deliberate strength. For days, I had lingered within the walls of that old house, haunted by memories and betrayal. Now, the front door loomed before me, a barrier between the world I had lost and the life I was about to reclaim. I opened it slowly. The hinges creaked, a soft, familiar sound that felt both intimate and alien. Sunlight spilled across the hallway, catching dust particles in golden streaks, illuminating the path I had ignored for too long. I stepped forward, one foot, then the other, each movement measured, deliberate, not hurried, not hesitant, but resolute. The door closed behind me with a gentle click, the sound echoing faintly in the empty hallway, sealing the past inside. Outside, the air smelled of damp earth and early morning dew. The city beyond was waking, indifferent to my personal upheaval, yet in its indifference lay a strange comfort. I did not need witnesses. I did not need applause. Every step I took was a silent declaration that I was no longer a bystander in my own life. I paused briefly on the threshold, feeling the sunlight warm my face. The suitcase beside me was more than luggage. It was a symbol of my decision, a container for both the remnants of a life I had lived and the promise of one I would create. I inhaled deeply, the scent of possibility mingling with the faint remnants of memory clinging to my clothes. Movement, I realized, was a form of courage. Not dramatic or loud, not announced to anyone, just steady, forward motion, reclaiming space, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming life. And as I walked down the path away from the house, each deliberate step grounded me more firmly in the knowledge that I would define my story on my own terms, silent, resilient, unstoppable. The London ticket rested in my palm, its edges crisp against my fingertips. For days, it had been a symbol of betrayal, proof that the life I thought we shared had been quietly stolen from me. But now, for the first time, I looked at it differently. It was no longer just a reminder of what I had lost, it was a door, a path, an opportunity. Sunlight caught the paper as I held it up, making the ink shimmer and the edges flutter like a small, rebellious bird. My heart, which had been heavy with grief and quiet fury, lifted slightly. What he had intended as a secret escape from me could become my own passage to freedom. The betrayal that had once felt like a trap now revealed a choice I had never considered. I could step forward, take control, and create a life that belonged entirely to me. I imagined the streets of London, the hum of trains, the crisp air, the unknown cafes and quiet parks. The city was a canvas, and for the first time, I realized I could paint on it with the colors of my own making. No one would dictate my happiness here. No one would shadow my steps. The ticket was not only proof of his deceit, it was the first tangible sign that my story was far from over. The flutter of the paper in my hand mirrored the stirrings in my chest, a mixture of fear and hope, anger and determination. Each beat reminded me that even in betrayal, life often leaves unexpected doors open. I tucked the ticket carefully into my bag, its significance quietly transforming from evidence of hurt to promise of possibility. Even betrayal, I realized, can open new doors. And with that understanding, I felt the first real glimmer of hope seep into the quiet spaces of my heart. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not out of relief, not out of forgiveness, but out of recognition that a new chapter was waiting, and this time, it would be mine entirely. I closed the suitcase with deliberate care, the latch clicking softly, echoing in the quiet room. The sound seemed almost ceremonial, as though marking the end of one life and the careful beginning of another. I smiled faintly, not out of joy, not out of relief, but because I understood something he could never know. I held secrets now, quiet strengths that he could never anticipate, plans that existed only in my mind. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic shouting, no scenes in hallways or tearful arguments over a betrayal that had already been exposed. I would simply live calmly, deliberately, unshakable. My existence, my choices, my freedom, these would be the quiet revenge that no one could interrupt, no one could challenge. The lock on the bedroom door clicked in the background as I walked past it, a subtle reminder of boundaries I was now reclaiming. Each sound, each movement, reinforced the fact that power often resides not in noise or spectacle, but in the things unseen. He would never witness the deliberate, slow unspooling of my strength. I would carry it silently, a force as steady as the ticking of a clock, as subtle as the shift of sunlight across a dusty floor. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the curtains sway with the breeze. Outside, the world moved on, indifferent to my quiet victories. And yet, I felt a satisfaction that was impossible to articulate, the kind that comes when one realizes that a life rebuilt deliberately, without the approval or awareness of those who have wronged you, is the most profound form of power. No confrontation, no cries, no spectacle, just resolve, just living, just thriving in a world that he had believed he controlled. And in that quiet, deliberate strength, I knew power lies in what others cannot see, and I was only beginning to understand how far I could go. I paused in the doorway, suitcase by my side, and let my eyes drift across the rooms one final time. The walls held shadows of laughter and arguments, of mornings I would never reclaim, of moments carefully erased by his absence. The sun had begun its slow descent, and its warm amber light spilled through the cracked windows, catching dust, motes and fractured glass alike, painting the empty house in colors both beautiful and cruel. I inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of aged wood, of memories mingled with neglect. Every step I had taken to reach this point, the letters, the photographs, the revelations had led me here. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Leave. Not with shouts, not with recrimination, not with tears. Just leave, quietly, and with dignity. The suitcase felt lighter than before, as if the act of walking away was stripping the house of its power over me. I straightened my shoulders, held my head high, and moved through the hallway one step at a time. Shadows stretched long across the floor, fading into the corners where dust and sunlight met, tracing the path I had already decided to take. The house would remain behind, silent and indifferent, while I stepped into a world that had yet to feel the full measure of my strength. The front door closed gently behind me, the sound muffled by the rustling wind. Outside, the sun continued its descent, reflecting off cracked windows and broken shutters, casting the house in a final, forgiving glow. I walked away without looking back, leaving behind memories, betrayal, and the life I had once thought was mine to command. True strength, I realized, is leaving quietly. It is in the calm dignity of choosing oneself over the ghosts of a life that was never fully real. And in that quiet walk into the fading sunlight, I understood that I had already begun the first steps of a life reclaimed, one deliberate breath at a time. The station was alive with noise, yet it felt like I had stepped into a bubble of my own world. The smell of steam and iron hung thick in the air, mixing with faint traces of coal and early morning rain. The platform vibrated under the roar of passing trains, each one carrying strangers whose lives would never intersect with mine, whose laughter and chatter seemed impossibly distant from the ache I carried. Ticket in hand, I watched the trains slice through the fog and mist, their engines hissing like restless creatures. My heart thudded in rhythm with the distant wheels, equal parts anticipation and fear. Every detail felt heightened. The echo of footsteps on the concrete, the clatter of luggage wheels, the steam curling upward in slow, ghostly spirals. It was all both terrifying and liberating. I was leaving behind betrayal, memories, and heartbreak, yet stepping toward a life I had only glimpsed through the fragile promise of a ticket. I gripped the ticket tighter, feeling its edges press into my palm. In its small, simple form lay the weight of all I had endured and the possibility of everything yet to come. There would be no spectators, no witnesses to my quiet reclaiming of power, only the steady, deliberate courage it took to step forward. I breathed deeply, letting the scent of steam and iron fill my lungs, grounding myself in the sensory world around me, reminding myself that courage is not loud. It is moving forward despite fear. The train slowed as it reached the platform, steam rising in swirling tendrils that caught the light of the morning sun. I stepped toward it, each footfall deliberate, each heartbeat echoing with resolve. The doors opened before me like an invitation to a new chapter, and as I boarded, feeling the gentle sway of the carriage beneath my feet, I understood that fear and hope can coexist and that embracing both is the first step toward truly living again. I pressed my hand lightly against the cold glass of the train window, feeling the hum of the engine beneath me and the subtle vibrations travel through my fingertips. Outside, the world was in motion, cities blurred into streaks of gray and gold, fields shifted like liquid under the rising sun, and the occasional tree or lamppost passed so quickly it felt unreal. And as the landscape changed, so did something inside me. The curtains fluttered gently in the soft morning light, catching the warmth of the sun and spilling it across the compartment in golden streaks. I watched them sway, rhythmic and unhurried, and it struck me that this movement mirrored my own slow, deliberate, inevitable. The betrayal, the pain, the years of quiet deception were all behind me now, sealed within the walls of the house I had left. The letters I had read, the truths I had uncovered. I didn't need to shout or seek revenge in dramatic fashion. The very act of reclaiming my life, of stepping into a space that had never been truly mine to lose, was enough. Each passing mile carried me further from the weight of his choices and closer to a version of myself I had long forgotten, calm, strong, unyielding. The window framed my transformation, a silent witness to the unfolding of my own story. I let my fingers rest on the glass, tracing the faint outline of condensation left by my touch. Freedom, I realized, is not always loud or visible. Sometimes it is the quietest form of revenge, a life rebuilt with dignity, a self reclaimed in subtle, powerful ways. And as the sun rose higher, spilling warmth across my face and through the fluttering curtains, I knew that I was moving forward, not with anger, but with the serene strength of someone who had survived, endured, and finally would thrive. The train carried me forward, past sprawling towns, misted valleys, and distant oceans shimmering under the morning sun. Each passing landscape felt like a gentle shedding of the past heartbreak, betrayal, and the weight of years quietly lifted. With every mile, I pressed my hand against the window, feeling the ocean wind brush my fingertips, cool and invigorating, carrying away the lingering shadows of a life I had once believed was lost. I closed my eyes and let the motion of the train lull me into reflection. The rhythmic sway mirrored the slow unfolding of my own story, one that I was finally living on my terms. There was no rush, no grand announcement, no vindication needed. The quiet empowerment of reclaiming my life, one deliberate step at a time, was enough. Each breath, each gust of wind, each glint of sunlight on the water reminded me that I had survived, endured, and was ready to thrive. In that moment, I understood that the journey wasn't just about London. It was about me, about moving through pain and betrayal toward the life I had waited for, the life I had quietly earned. The train carried me onward, but it also carried a deeper truth. Every ending, no matter how painful, is the beginning of something new, a chapter waiting to be written with hope and courage. And now, if you've been with me through this story, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts. Where are you watching from? And which moment spoke to you the most? If this story touched you, your support truly helps me continue sharing these journeys. Hit that like button, maybe even a super thanks. And don't forget to subscribe for more life stories that inspire, empower, and remind us that even in betrayal, there's a path forward. On screen, you'll see 2 new stories I highly recommend, and I can't wait to bring you into the next journey. See you there. With love and respect.